Hey, what's up? Welcome to the Bronze Cave. I'm Christopher, aka the Bronze Age Nerd, and today we're going to talk about something Todd McFarlane said on an interview about female action figures. So I love action figures, and one of my favorite action figure producers over the last few decades has been McFarlane Toys. They've definitely improved over time. They went from kind of a statue, static style figure to now fully posable figures, and of course, acquiring the DC Multiverse license for a really cool line of figures. I've collected a few figures from this line. I really dig it. Todd McFarlane recently went on Shartimusprime's channel to discuss the superhero figure business that he runs. Now, it's kind of interesting. I watched that video because I wanted to make sure I saw the entire interview for myself. And towards the end of the interview, Todd McFarlane basically just brings this up on his own. He talks about female action figures. So part of what Todd McFarlane talks about in that interview is essentially what kind of figures are going to sell. And he says that superhero figures sell. He talks about how if you go down the boy aisle, his words, for toys, and you see action figures, the heroes like Captain America, Superman, Batman are going to sell. The villains are going to sell less than that. The female figures are going to sell less than that. Again, I'm kind of paraphrasing what he said here. So I first heard about this because of a Bleeding Cool article that is very critical of what Todd McFarlane says in this interview. I think that's very interesting to kind of dissect this in such a negative way. Now, I'm a big action figure collector. While I disagree with the notion that there shouldn't be as many female action figures or there shouldn't be as many villain figures, for example, let's just talk about that too. I also think that Todd McFarlane pretty clearly is talking about sales. He's talking about what sells. And I don't doubt that he's right. I think that male figures probably do sell more. And that's a sound premise, even if it's not an ideal premise that we all would strive for and hope exists. I think it's still probably true. You know, because where I agree is there's probably some elements of the action figure industry that are a little male dominated, of course. And not all male collectors are willing to seek out female figures. That's a strange thing, but I certainly know there's people that, you know, they just don't do it. But I think there's also kind of an interesting mix here. So what are we talking about? Are we talking about, because in his little story, his sort of parable he tells about action figure collectors, he's talking about young boys mostly that are buying figures, which is interesting because I actually don't know. And I don't know if there's any good information on this. Maybe his company has research information on this. You know, I really don't know what the sales breakdown is for these 6 and 7 inch figures when we're talking about these toy lines like DC Multiverse or Marvel Legends or G.I. Joe Classified, for example. I think that it's probably skewing pretty heavily towards the adult collector, but maybe that's just me that thinks that. So basically he tells this story where this boy gets a female action figure instead of one of his favorite superhero figures or whatever. And he essentially ends the story by saying that serial killers are born that way, essentially, which is maybe a little out there. I think it's just a joke. I think people are taking that a little too seriously, but it did kind of, you know, it made Shartimusprime even kind of go, whoa, you know, it's a bold statement, but it's also probably an off the cuff statement. It's probably a personal opinion he has. I really don't think he's serious about that by any stretch of the imagination. And here's where I'll kind of just inject my personal take on it. I wish there were more female action figures. I really enjoy female characters from comic books, especially in general. You know, I love Supergirl, I love Power Girl, Rogue, Psylocke, Jean Grey. You know, these are some of my favorite characters, and I want to see better figures for them. Like if you look at the Marvel Legends side, obviously with the Marvel license, those figures need some work. I mean, they use outdated molds. They don't update those molds as often. They have poor limited posability because the balance is all off. They have weak ankles or they have high heels that don't really balance very well. And there's no consideration made for those characters on how they're going to display, the fact that they pretty much all have the same body mold. It's a little tiresome. McFarlane Toys has done a little bit better job, but also not very many female figures. Proportions and scale have been pretty off too. Like that first Harley Quinn figure we got was way too tall. I did like the Batgirl figures that they've done, but hey, anyways, my point is that there could be plenty more female characters. I mean, I'd love to see a Supergirl. I'd love to see a Power Girl in that line. Two of my dream figures from that line. So where I think this is interesting, where I think that it kind of breaks down for me is Todd McFarlane in that same interview is talking about how we don't dictate the terms to the publishers or to the rights holders for what figures are going to be in these lines or the kind of choices they're going to make essentially. And yet he still says, he makes the point later on in the video that, you know, sometimes I'm like, hey guys, you know, would you want to see this character if you were a 9-year-old, that kind of thing. And that's before he talked about this whole female action figure thing. And if that's the case, what you're telling me is that you have some control over this. You could influence this. You could tell them like, hey, Supergirl's a popular character. Let's make a figure of that. That's what I'm getting from his statements. And yet he's making it seem like, well, you know, the boys collectors aren't going to want to see that. Where the Bleeding Cool article gets me is it saying like, no, that's not true. You know, you can't say that female action figures don't sell as well. It's an adult collector's market. I don't know. I've walked down a lot of toy aisles looking for figures, harder to find stuff or whatever that I try to find at stores, so I usually check when I'm getting my groceries at Target or Walmart or whatever, right? And when I look, there's usually more female figures that are left on the pegs than male figures. And there's also more male figures that are released than female figures. So there's probably some truth to what Todd's saying. Now, you could make the argument that maybe they need to make better female figures and those would sell more. And that's where I'm hoping we can kind of shift the discussion where we as the collectors can say, hey, the ones of us that do want those female figures, can we get more high quality figures for popular female characters? And then let's see how they do. That's my whole point. I'm really curious what you guys think about this, and I want you to let me know in the comments down below. If you've made it this far in the video, there are a lot of ways you can support the channel down below in the description. One of those ways is you could go over to Dangerous Waters Comics and More and use the discount code that's listed down below there. You could also go check out Turlock Comics over on Instagram, and you can order your comic book supplies through Gemini. You could also consider becoming a channel member or supporting me on Ko-fi. But what I appreciate the most is you commenting and sharing this video with others. It helps out the channel quite a bit, and thank you for doing that. Hope everybody has a great day, and I want to remind you, as always, hey. Read comics every day.